Five Live Formula One.
Hello, I'm Ben Edwards, and I've been commentating on round 7 of the FIA Formula One World Championship, an event at Imola that has seen a remarkable victory by Max Verstappen. I am joined alongside by my co-commentators today, Mark Priestley, former F1 mechanic at McLaren, and our F1 correspondent for BBC Sports, Andrew Benson. So it has been a really interesting race weekend because McLaren dominated at Miami with incredible speed in the race itself. Oscar Piastri took the pole position for this event, so McLaren were on the top front row, but Max Verstappen was alongside because Lando didn't do the qualifying quite so well. But it was all about the run into the first corner that Max Verstappen swept into the lead early on and then went on to basically control the rest of the race, which had various incidents we'll get into.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think overall, this was a very different weekend to the one that we saw in Miami. And you're right, McLaren won that race by over 30 seconds. They were so dominant on race day. Today was totally different. In fact, the weekend was totally different because although Piastri was on the front, was on pole position, Max Verstappen was 34 milliseconds behind him in qualifying. So the overall pace was much, much closer. And when it came to today, this is a circuit that's much more tricky to overtake on. We said right at the beginning it was going to be all about getting through that first corner first. And although actually Verstappen didn't have quite as good a start off the line as Piastri did, he was late on the brakes into turn one, ran around the outside of the McLaren and came out in first position. And from there, he just executed everything pretty much perfectly.
Andrew, we did have some change in strategy to what we expected. We knew this weekend it could be different because we had a new very soft tyre coming in from Pirelli. That was not used in the race, but it did kind of had a bit of a gearing on what was used, and it was different strategies between teams that did have an effect in the race itself.
Yeah, there was a bit of that sort of further down the field, but I think at the front, the main thing was probably track position. I mean, it would have been really interesting to see how the race would have developed if Piastri had kept the lead at the first corner, because he was struggling in the dirty air behind Verstappen. He held on for about 10 laps or so, but then began to drop back a bit, and that persuaded McLaren to make an early pit stop, and that's basically where his race started to unravel, because he then had to fight back through the midfielders, so which meant that he was then going to be on an offset strategy. Even if the race had run without safety cars, he was going to be struggling because Norris and Verstappen would have pitted much later than him. Verstappen was able to build a lead that Piastri couldn't get anywhere near. So from that point on, it was basically Verstappen was going to win the race, and the McLaren drivers were battling for second and third places. Some questions about that strategy call from Piastri. I think actually the race pace of the Verstappen and Red Bull and the two McLarens was very similar. It just didn't look like it from the way the race panned out and the choices that were made.
Very interesting. Well, Max Verstappen, for what was the 400th Grand Prix for Red Bull, went on to take victory, his 65th career win and 4th consecutive win at Imola. Let's hear from Max Verstappen.
Hey Max, congratulations. Saw how happy you were when you got out of the car. Was this a really good one to get under your belt?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see this one coming, to be honest. The car was a lot more balanced, I think, throughout the whole race, and that made me push a bit harder, I guess, on the tires, and that worked. Very, very happy. I think on both of the compounds, I think we're quite competitive, and I think that has been a while.
That move on Oscar right at the start was something incredibly special. Can you ever let yourself think about that, just how good a move it was?
At the time when I got past, of course, I was happy. I enjoyed it. Of course, it's not easy to go around the outside there and try to be as close as possible to not be in the dirt. But it worked out really well.
So Max speaking to Lawrence Barretto, he took the victory with quite a comfortable margin, even though we had a late safety car period, the ability to pull away. But what was interesting was the change in second place, because Oscar Piastri was running second when the race got back underway after the last safety car, but he wasn't able to hold on his teammate. We did wonder, and we were discussing, will the team make an organisation to change the order? But it wasn't like that, was it?
Well, there were so many moments in this race where Imola can often throw up a relatively dull Grand Prix, a one-stopper typically, difficult to overtake, and that's kind of what we went into it expecting. But actually, there were so many things that tipped it on its head. A virtual safety car in the first instance when Esteban Ocon pulled to the side of the racetrack. That didn't close up the field, but did give people an opportunity for an early pit stop. Max Verstappen, that really fell just perfectly for him, alongside Lando Norris as well. And then later in the race, the bit you're referring to there was the full safety car when Kimi Antonelli also stopped at the side of the racetrack. And after that full safety car, which did, of course, close the entire pack up, yes, it was Verstappen in front, it was Oscar Piastri second, but he did not make a late change for fresh tyres, whereas Lando Norris did. That meant we had a situation with fresh tyres on Verstappen in front and a very fast car, Oscar Piastri in second with much, much older tyres, then Lando Norris with much faster tyres. Behind that, I think there was Alex Albon. Alex Albon on fresher tyres as well, Leclerc on older tyres, Hamilton on newer tyres. So it was a topsy-turvy top half of the grid. Verstappen executed perfectly, but you're referring to this moment when the two McLarens, line astern on the racetrack, closed up behind Verstappen, with Lando Norris in third, but on much faster tyres. And we talked about it. Could McLaren make this decision to actively swap their cars immediately when they go racing again to give Lando the opportunity to go and fight Max Verstappen? They didn't make that decision. They're trying to balance the dynamic between their two drivers in this big championship battle that we think is going to unfold. And in doing so, they allowed the two drivers to fight. Lando did eventually get his way past, but it cost him enough time. And probably in reality, he didn't have enough pace to overtake Verstappen anyway. So that's the way it played out. But it was a fascinating Grand Prix from start to finish.
It was. I think, though, that we should focus on what really defined it, which was that move at the first corner. For me, Verstappen was an absolutely outstandingly brave move. And I think two things happened. Piastri has admitted that he braked a little bit early there. But that was because he was defending kind of in the middle of the track. Actually, I think in hindsight, he'll probably think he could have moved a little bit further to the right. And that would have, if he'd just given Verstappen less than a car's width on the outside, Verstappen couldn't have made that move so easily. And he probably could have kept the lead. As it was, he left the door open for Verstappen, braked too early on the middle line, which you have to do because maybe not as early as he did, but you still have to brake earlier on that line because you're not on the racing line. You've got a shallower trajectory into the corner. Verstappen was able to go around the outside and wow, he really committed. They call it full send, the racing drivers these days, and he really sent it and swept round the outside, and that won him the race. And of course there were a whole load of things afterwards, the big gap that was then reduced by the virtual safety, created by the virtual safety car, then reduced by the safety car, but once he was in the lead, he was in control, and he was never going to let go of the race from there.
That's a very good point. McLaren did their best to try and come back, and as you said, Mark, Lando Norris finding that way past Oscar Piastri towards the end. And no doubt Oscar will be a little disappointed that he ended up down in third place, having started from pole position, but he is still the championship leader. And the top three now, that is Piastri, Norris and Max Verstappen, are separated by just 22 points. So it is going to be close as we continue on through the year. For McLaren, it was a good day in terms of points, maybe not the ultimate. Let's hear from Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri.
Hey Oscar, it seems odd to say commiserations on the podium, but I kind of just feel like nothing really went your way today. Just talk me through how you're feeling right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a bit disappointed. It was a tough race. Yeah, not a lot of things went our way today. I think obviously turn one wasn't great from me, and then I think we decided to go one way with the strategy, and I don't think it was the right way in the end. But at that point, it seemed like a decent idea. So and then afterwards, pretty much every VSC and safety car was poorly timed. So just a tough race. I think to come out third is still okay, obviously, but not quite the afternoon we were looking for.
Were you surprised a little bit about the overall pace as well, and is that a little bit of a concern given just how good Red Bull looked today?
Yeah, I think they were definitely quicker than we expected. That was not ideal, obviously, but it would have been interesting to see what the difference of clean air made. But yeah, even in the first stint I was struggling a little bit, and that's why we went early. So some things to look at for sure.
Hey Lando, a heck of a pass on Oscar and a great recovery drive from P4. How are you feeling right now?
Reasonable. A tough race, a long race. Kind of was going the way, then it goes away from you, and then it comes back. So just a bit of a race of patience today, which is always hard to prepare for. But I think we did a good job with the strategy with going long in the first stint. I think the only downside is we just didn't have the pace to the Red Bull. They were very quick. Max was very quick today. And not only did we struggle on pace, but I think we also struggled just with the degradation of things too. So, what was our biggest strength 2 weekends ago turned into not being good enough this weekend. So it shows how quickly things can change. But I think we're happy otherwise. It's still a good team result, and that's the main thing.
Were you a little bit surprised on that pace side of things from the relative pace that Red Bull showed, but also that you guys had over here across the weekend?
When you look at yesterday, probably not. I think Oscar put in a very, very good lap to get pole. On average, Max was quicker, and it just turned out that this track, with the degradation of this track, therefore suited them. We had a bit more rear degradation rather than kind of overheating and things like that. It was more just rear deg, and that seems to be where the Red Bull is still very, very strong in these slow speed corners. So we know that. We've said it the whole year that we aren't getting complacent, because we know how good they can be at times. When things click and when they get it right, they're ahead, and that's the way it was today. So we just have to keep working. Nothing more to say than that. We have to keep our heads down, keep working on ourselves, and keep doing what we're doing.
So Lando Norris finished in second place. Oscar Piastri was in third place. It's fascinating to see these changes of performance in Red Bull and McLaren. We know that the championship battle is definitely between those two teams. But what are your guys' thoughts on how it's going so far?
I thought this, as I said before, this was a much closer weekend in terms of the performance all the way through the weekend. It wasn't like Miami, where McLaren had such a dominant weekend. But also, I think if you look at the execution today, McLaren had pole position. Because there was no major discrepancy or disparity between the two cars in terms of performance. It wasn't like one was way quicker than the other. Given they started on pole position on a circuit that's not the easiest to overtake it, they should have won this race, and yet they didn't. So I think there'll be some questions about strategy. Obviously, we've talked about that first corner where Max was just so clinical and so decisive, but I think that's really the story of the day. Max was clinical, Red Bull were clinical, they got their strategy absolutely right, they played a blinder. You could say that the virtual safety car fell really fortunately for them, but you could also flip that and say, well, they had the ability, because they were in the lead of the race, having made that great decisive move at turn one, to give themselves the freedom to run really long. We know there's a very high chance of safety cars and incidents happening here. We've seen it all weekend long, so they played that excellently. Their pit stops were excellent. You go over to McLaren's side, there's going to be questions about their strategy. I don't think they got anything wildly wrong, but I think they could. It wasn't the smoothest weekend. Their pit stops weren't great either. So it just wasn't the perfect weekend for McLaren, where it probably was for Max, at least, on Red Bull's side of the garage.
Yeah, the virtual safety car just locked in or made much bigger an advantage that Verstappen already had. It didn't really change that much. It just really put the race to bed until the final safety car. But I think there's a pattern emerging this year. And it looks stark because it looks like a big swing between Miami and Imola, but that's the point. It's basically, this was a race where just general tyre degradation was at play rather than rear tyre overheating. In the rear tyre overheating scenarios, the McLaren is by far the best car, which is what happened in Miami. In a case where it's just a quicker circuit like Imola or like Suzuka, for example, and it's just the tyres are just being used and it's not a particularly overheating problem, then the McLaren and the Red Bull are basically even. And Piastri, according to Norris, Piastri made a really great lap to put it on pole, and just beat Verstappen by that tiny margin that Mark mentioned earlier. But it's an even fight, which it wasn't in Miami. And I think what we're not seeing so far anyway are circuits where Red Bull have the sort of advantage that McLaren have at other tracks. So it's basically at the moment so far either McLaren significantly ahead or equal. So if that carries on through the season, McLaren will win the championship, because the equal races, Verstappen will win some of them and McLaren will win some of them. But the McLaren races, McLaren will win them all, probably. So unless Red Bull can turn that pattern around, then as the season goes on, it's going to be harder and harder for Red Bull to really make an inroad into that lead that Piastri and Norris have, I think.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That's really interesting, and we shall see how that all goes at the various different circuits, different temperatures, obviously, as we go through the season. Ferrari had a really tough time in qualifying at this event, with both cars not qualifying in the top 10, and that was painful with so many Ferrari fans at Imola. It really was a difficult one for both Charles Leclerc, who was quite upset after qualifying, and Lewis Hamilton. They were 11th and 12th on the grid. But the fact that Lewis Hamilton actually got his best finish for Ferrari in a Grand Prix, okay, he's won a sprint race, but in a Grand Prix, 4th place finish is his best for Ferrari. He seemed pretty happy with the way it went.
He was the happiest I've seen him for a while. Other than that sprint race win early in the season, it was a really buoyant Lewis Hamilton. It's his first experience, isn't it, of being in front of the Tifosi, dressed in red. The first time he's beaten Charles Leclerc in a race as well since he joined Ferrari. So there were a lot of positives for Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't want to be celebrating too greatly finishing 4th, but you're right, given where he started this Grand Prix, it was looking like it was going to be a dire afternoon for the entire Ferrari team and their fans, because it was so difficult to make your way through a pack from literally from the middle of the grid. But actually, they played a bit of a blinder. They did an alternate strategy to most of the top 10 by starting on the hard tyre as opposed to the medium. That virtual safety car helped them, and the car seemed to work really well on race day, where it really struggled in qualifying, and that's been a bit of a theme for them this season. So if there's an area they've really got to work on, it's putting themselves higher on the grid on Saturday to give themselves a much easier job on Sunday.
And there was a patience from Lewis Hamilton too. He was stuck behind Kimi Antonelli in the early stages, but the latter stages really worked for him. Let's hear from him.
Hey Lewis, a heck of a fight back today. Is that the kind of stuff that you would have dreamed of, to be in red, to be fighting through the field, to hear the roar in your name every time you got a pass in? It must be something special.
I mean, obviously I couldn't hear him, but to drive in front of the Tifosi today, this weekend, has been, a highlight of the year so far, and there's a lot of pressure on us as a team with not struggling through the year so far with the car and particularly with our qualifying. So to have such a strong race and to be moving forwards, making ground, it was such a great feeling. And I would say for me, I don't remember the last time I had a race like that where you're moving forwards. I'm sure there was one maybe last year, but this one's different, obviously, because I'm in the red car, and I haven't done that yet. So to finally have that connection, that synergy with the car today and progressing was a really great feeling.
Does it feel like, when you get that feeling, that there is a bit of light now? There's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that you're cracking it when you're making changes, they're actually working?
I mean, I don't want to jinx it, so for sure there's lots of positives to take away from today, and we had pace. So we really need to dissect and understand where, what, and why. But I did think we would make an improvement this weekend with something we try and fix, and I think there's more to come. But the setup was really good. Car felt freaking mega in setup-wise, and as I said, the strategists, the team did a fantastic job with strategy calls and pit stops. So overall, mega job for Ferrari.
Andrew, it was great to see Lewis Hamilton so happy driving for Ferrari at this home event for them. And it was a bit of a surprise to see that he'd come through to 4th. I mean, it was part of the way that the whole race developed, but nonetheless, he did a good job.
He did indeed, and it was great to watch him come through the field. Lots of spectacle involved in that, lots of good overtaking moves at the end. But I think there's a big concern for Ferrari out of this race weekend, or rather out of the season so far. It's that they're never really quite sure what they're going to get. In Miami, the qualifying wasn't too bad. The race was pretty bad. In Imola, the qualifying was terrible, and the race suddenly went quite well. Why? They don't know. This is the point, and it's all to do with how they're working the tyres. So one possible explanation for what's happened today, for example, is that maybe they were overheating their tyres in qualifying, but then as the rubber comes off the tyres in the race, overheating becomes less of an issue, so you can push harder, and therefore your pace becomes much more competitive. Now, they were the third fastest team, without question, today, behind Red Bull and McLaren, who were pretty much neck and neck, and no one else was anywhere near them, but they weren't like that 2 weeks ago. So what's going on? I think that's the concern for Ferrari. Hamilton feels really positive now because he's just had a race where he's come back through the field, finished 4th after being 12th, and he was on for a good result even before the safety car with that long run, and then the VSC helped him a lot. before the final safety car. But until they can get to the bottom of why the car's not behaving in a consistently predictable way, they're going to keep having these weekends where their pace veers one way to another. And I think the problem for them is that now they've got Monaco coming up. Last year, they dominated at Monaco with Charles Leclerc from pole position, won the race, controlled it throughout. And although there was all sorts of situations created by the fact there was a first lap safety car, people might be going to Monaco expecting Ferrari to do the same thing, but this year's Ferrari doesn't perform in the same way as last year's Ferrari. Last year it was really quick and slow speed corners. This year it's not quick and slow speed corners. So actually they're expecting a difficult weekend in Monaco. So I suspect there are going to be more questions about Ferrari after Monaco, just as there are now, even though they've done well this weekend.
And the other thing that they're similarly scratching their heads about is they can't seem to find any pace when they bolt new tyres onto the car in qualifying on a Saturday, when others around them seem to take that sort of standard leap of 2 or 3 tenths by putting a new set on. With Ferrari, and it's happened yesterday, it's happened earlier in the season as well, it's just not making almost any difference to the performance of their car. And I think the bigger problem, as Andrew says, is they don't know why. It's not like they know what the problem is and how to fix it. They're just waiting for the parts to turn up and to solve it. They don't really know. They don't understand it enough. That's their biggest challenge. That's what they've got to do an awful lot of work on. They will be, of course, but these races are coming thick and fast. We're in the beginning of a triple header here. Before you know it, we're going to be halfway through a season.
And there's been some frustration for Charles Leclerc. Ironically, they actually made a really good move with Charles early in that race. They made him make an early pit stop, which actually moved him well up the order. But he was frustrated later because, again, the virtual safety car and safety car periods and tyres that he was on at the end just did not work.
Well, this is the point you were making much earlier, Ben, which I kind of didn't answer at the time, but I can answer now. Some drivers ran out of tyres in this race, and he was one of them, and it was because of the early stop. The same thing happened to Oscar Piastri. He made the early stop, therefore he couldn't then stop under the final safety car because he didn't have any tyres that would go to the end of the race. The same thing happened to Fernando Alonso. I kind of moved on to Aston Martin without you asking me, but he qualified 5th and was looking to get some strong points for the first time this year. But he made the early stop just like Piastri did, and then the 2 virtual safety car and then safety car periods absolutely messed him up because he had no tyres to go onto either. So that's why Leclerc ended up on no tyres, on old tyres at the end. Alonso did pit under the safety car finally and put on some fresher tyres, and he made up some ground, but it wasn't enough to recover the ground that he'd lost earlier on, and he only managed to finish 11th.
Again, and that's where he seems to finish 11th several times this year, but he still hasn't scored any points, which is a bit scary. And I do feel for Fernando because actually in qualifying he did a really good job. He was 5th on the grid, but to finish down in 11th, very, very disappointing. Let's just quickly mention, Aston Martin had a good qualifying and a poor race. Williams had both. They had good qualifying and a very good race as well, particularly with Alex Albon finishing in 5th position.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where they are these days. They are definitely well inside the top 10 group, and on different weekends they can be anywhere from sort of P10 up to P5. That's their genuine pace. This is the sign of a Williams team, and in fact a larger organisation at Williams that have done so much rebuilding work under James Vowles over the last couple of years. It's gearing really towards the big opportunity coming in 2026 when all the technical regulations change, but actually they're already seeing some major benefits because everything and everybody is working well. They've strengthened their driver pairing, bringing in Carlos Sainz alongside Alex Albon. It's a really strong lineup inside the car, and everything they're bringing to the car seems to be working. So they are taking giant leaps forward at a time which could really allow them to benefit from the massive opportunity that comes next year with these huge regulation changes.
Oh, I totally agree. And for Alex Albon, it's the 3rd time he's finished in 5th place in this 2025 season. So let's hear from him.
Hey, Alex, heck of a drive, but I'm assuming it's going to be a case of mixed emotions, I guess, because it could have been even better when you were fighting for a podium.
Yeah, weird, isn't it? On a pure race, we were fighting for P3, P4, but that's no safety cars. That's just a pure situation. Obviously, maybe a little bit lucky with the VSC, admittedly, but at the same time, got unlucky again on the last safety car. So, back-to-back P5s and coming away today a bit disappointed, which is a bit strange to say. I think maybe could have raced Charles a bit differently. Could have done a bit better there. Obviously lost out to Lewis, and then maybe could have been a bit more patient with my overtake to Charles. I was kind of honestly licking my lips. I thought I could even get Oscar up in front as well if such was the pace and the new tyres we had on the car. So yeah, very happy.
How insane is it that you are racing in Mercedes, the Ferrari? You even said you might have had a shot at McLaren today. And is it real? You know, can we start to think that this is something that could happen more regularly?
It's a weird one. Honestly, I keep telling myself it won't happen again, and it's this race, and then we go to the next race and we're quick again, and it's a bit like, is it circumstantial? Is it not? I would honestly say Miami and here we've been quick. In my opinion, almost unexpectedly quick this weekend. I expected Miami to be good, but not here, and it kind of opens the window for what else. You know, maybe next week we're going to be good. I actually think Monaco won't be too bad. I think Barcelona we're going to struggle, but let's keep going, enjoying this while it lasts.
So Alex Albon talking to Lawrence Barretto, and Andrew, it's really interesting that the Williams team has taken a long time to get a good result at Imola over many years. I think it was 2004, apparently, that they had a result even better than that when they actually had a podium. Yes, there's been a gap in the Imola schedule. It's not been here every time. But the fact that Carlos Sainz was also in there in 8th place, double points for Williams again, it is going very strongly.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically consistently, or have been until this weekend, basically the 5th fastest car. And kind of in a bit of no man's land in a way. They haven't been quite on the pace of the top 4, but they've got a little bit of an advantage over the people behind them. It's going to be interesting in that context whether this Aston Martin upgrade is going to bring them into that sort of playground as well. And the other interesting thing about the Williams performance this weekend is that they were pretty much level with Mercedes on race pace. Mercedes had a really difficult weekend, and they don't actually really know why yet. They're hoping that it's overheating tyres and they'll find some kind of problem, because they had no pace at all. Kimi Antonelli retired in the end, and George Russell's finished 7th, which is not what he would have been expecting, having started 3rd on the grid. So a difficult one for Mercedes, and another team where, you know, just another example of if you get things slightly out of the window, as they describe it in Formula One, you can suddenly have a really terrible day.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. Just behind Russell and Sainz, Isaac Hadjar did a good job for the Racing Bulls team, the Faenza team originally, of course. It's first points for that local team since F1's come back to Imola in 2020. And the final point went to Yuki Tsunoda for Red Bull, and he had to make a pit lane start after a pretty scary accident yesterday, Mark. So relief in a way for Yuki Tsunoda to score a point after what was a tough weekend for him.
It was a tough weekend, a monumental accident on Saturday, one of the biggest I've seen for a very long time, and thankfully he walked away from that. But there was a full rebuild required for that car, so the team had to break the curfew. I think they were in the garages till about 2 a.m. That was a brand new chassis, new power unit, loads of new components to get that car back together. He started from the pit lane, and actually to take the final point, you've got to say it's a pretty decent recovery drive. But the bigger picture here is that Red Bull still haven't found anyone that's able to get anywhere near the sort of talent level, or at least anywhere near the results level, that Max Verstappen's able to do. That's P10 in a car that dominated this Grand Prix. And, you know, we'll give him some credit. He's a young driver. He's early in his career with Red Bull. But it's a larger problem, isn't it, that Red Bull have? They still haven't found. They've cycled through a whole load of drivers and never managed to find anybody close to Max. Now, yes, Max is a generational talent. He's unbelievably good. And I think this is what this is really pointing to. But they are in a fight this year. There is no way that Red Bull are going to have any hope of taking on McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. In fact, nobody looks like they're going to be challenging McLaren at this point. Max Verstappen has a realistic shot of winning, or at least challenging, for the driver's title. It might be an outside bet, but he's there or thereabouts. But because they've only got one driver, there's no way they can even have any hope of trying to challenge for the Constructors' Championship.
That's a very good point. Well, it was a fascinating race, and I have to say it was even more entertaining than I was expecting as we were commentating on the race, because often it is just cars not overtaking. We actually, because of the virtual safety car and safety car periods, we saw a lot of overtaking as people were on different tyres at different times, but Max Verstappen certainly dominated it in the end. I've got to ask you guys, best driver of the day, who's it going to be? Is everyone going to go for the same driver?
Well, it's almost impossible. Max didn't do anything wrong. In fact, he just did everything right. So on that basis, you've got to say yes. But I'd like to a big shout out to Alex Albon, because I think he drove a phenomenal race as well in a car that, as Andrew said, probably the 5th fastest car, and he sort of outperformed it.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's hard not to give it to Verstappen just for that move at the first corner. It was just breathtaking. And just that move itself, it not only earned him the win, it deserved him the win, if you like. I mean, the other drivers had good days. You know, Hamilton obviously had a good day. Leclerc was having a good day until the safety cars messed him up. Alonso was having a very strong drive, and likewise, his strategy went wrong. I wouldn't really want to pick anyone else apart from that, but I can't look past Verstappen. He was just outstanding.
What about you?
I think I have to go for Max Verstappen as well. I'd love to give a star to Lewis Hamilton as well, though, because it was delightful to see him so happy and with the support of the Ferrari fans. But Max Verstappen's performance this weekend, you know, getting on that front row and then that move he made on the first lap, and then the way he was able to pull away in the final part after the last safety car, he dominated the race, really. So he took his 65th career win and certainly thoroughly enjoyed it. So we'll be looking forward to Monaco coming up soon, a race that Charles Leclerc won last year, but Max Verstappen's won there in the past. There'll be plenty more to think about and focus on, but thank you for joining us as we've been looking back at the race at Imola, and we'll be soon looking forward to the race at Monaco. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.